amazing historian who is going to be, well, I won't give away anything really because she's going to talk about it all, but we're so honored to have her with us this morning. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So before I start, I never had a bat mitzvah. Both of my daughters, Eliza and Chloe, were bat mitzvahed here, and my mom, Nancy Nance, was confirmed here at Rodef Shalom. But over the past few days, as Eliza has observed me getting jangled nerves, overheard me practicing, noted numerous trips to the synagogue, she kept saying, "Mom, I feel like this is your bat mitzvah. I feel like this is your bat mitzvah." And as I stand here in front of friends from all chapters of my life, family, a quarter of West Mount Airy, and relatives I've never met, I have to say that she was right. And I also have to say that the fact that our religion expects 13-year-olds to do something similar to this in Hebrew, no less, it's really amazing. So, okay, with that. All right. I first heard of Julian Francis Abele in 2007 when I was teaching African American history at Masterman High School. In doing some research about this Black architect, I learned that he had been a good friend of Louis Magaziner. I wasn't quite sure my relation to Magaziner, but I did know he was family. I was intrigued, but as a busy teacher with 2 young girls, pursuing family research was not an option. Fast forward to a year and a half ago, no longer a teacher, parenting had become less demanding, and I did indeed have time to do some research and writing about my family. With deep roots in Philadelphia on both my maternal and paternal sides, I had a lot to work with. After first conquering the low-hanging fruit of summarizing memoirs written by my grandfather and my great-grandfather, and thanks Hidden City for publishing both pieces, I then turned my attention to Julian Abele and my great-grand-uncle, Louis Magaziner. I was determined to learn more about their unusual friendship. First, though, quick biographies of both men. It worked. Okay. Julian Abele was born into a prominent Philadelphia family, branches of which include the likes of civil rights lawyer Raymond Pace Alexander and his wife, Sadie Tanner Moselle Alexander, and the painter Henry Ossawa Tanner. He graduated from the venerable Institute for Colored Youth at 9th and Bainbridge, now, like everything else, an upscale condo. He then studied architectural drawing at Pennsylvania Museum School of Industrial Arts, now University of the Arts. At the age of 17, Julian enrolled at the University of Pennsylvania School of Architecture. After graduating in 1902, he spent nearly his entire architectural career in the firm of Horace Trumbauer, quickly rising to the position of chief designer and eventually taking over the firm with a colleague following Trumbauer's death. Because Trumbauer's employees did not sign their work, there is much controversy about how big Abele's role was in various projects. I will not be delving into that controversy. Suffice it to say that Abele was instrumental in projects including many Gilded Age mansions, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the Free Library of Philadelphia, and the Widener Library at Harvard. It is incontrovertible that Abele was the lead architect for the Duke University campus, though his role was generally ignored until brought to the university's attention by Abele's great-grandniece, Susan Cook, in 1988, showing once again the crucial role of the great-grandniece in bringing important history to light. I'm here all week. Louis Magaziner was born in Jmena, Austria, now part of Slovakia. At age 10, he immigrated to Philadelphia along with his parents and 7 siblings to join 3 of his sisters who had come over earlier. Finding success as dressmakers serving Philadelphia's established German Jewish community. Louis is circled in red, and my great-grandmother, Lena, is in yellow. How many of you here today are descendants of the people in this photo and thus part of the extended Magaziner family? Okay. There will be a Magaziner family photo at the end of my talk, so please stick around a bit. Okay. Louis Magaziner attended Central High School when it was located at Broad and Green. Like Rodef Shalom, the school was then on the east side of Broad and Green. This image is of the building across the street on the west side of Broad, to which Central moved a few years after Louis had graduated. And the Magaziners were, of course, members of Rodef Shalom. After graduating in 1900 with a degree in architecture from Penn, Louis worked for and founded a variety of firms, most notably Magaziner, Eberhard, and Harris. He worked in a range of styles, from North Broad Street's Art Deco Uptown Theater, the now demolished Mount Sinai Hospital in Pennsport, the modernist Sidney Hillman Medical Center that was located on 20th and Chestnut, and the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Building on 20th and South, as well as many, many other projects, both in Philadelphia and other locales. As you can see, each of them separately had notable careers, particularly given that they were both members of marginalized groups. Abel, a black man, and Magaziner, an immigrant and a Jew. You can understand why I wanted to learn more about their connection to each other. As any honest 21st century researcher will tell you, I first turned to Wikipedia. From the entry for Julian Abele. He was the first black student admitted to the Department of Architecture at the University of Pennsylvania. On projects assigned to pairs of students, he partnered with Louis Magaziner, the only Jewish student in the department, who also faced discrimination. This was the beginning of a lifelong friendship between the two. On the remarkable family website, organized by Magaziner descendant Tracy Rich, who is also here today, I found a similar description. At Penn, Louis was a classmate and friend of Julian Abele, the first black architect to graduate from that university. Louis was the only Jew in the program at the time, and their shared status as disparaged minorities in the predominantly wealthy WASP program was the beginning of a lifelong friendship. Was I ever excited? As a product of 13 years of Quaker schooling, a veteran of 8 years teaching African American history, and a Jew to boot, this story of oppressed minorities bound together in defiance of the aristocracy got my self-righteous juices flowing. Plus, as a former group leader and board member for Operation Understanding, a leadership program for African American and Jewish youth, I am quite familiar with the long and continuing history of the Black-Jewish Alliance, an alliance dedicated to expanding rights and dignity and exemplified by Rodef Shalom's close connection to Mother Bethel Church and Rabbi Freeman's work with the Power Organization. I was pretty certain that the Abele Magaziner friendship was one more example of this special relationship. As I pursued the story, however, the narrative kept shifting, and my understanding of their friendship became more complicated. Today, I will be sharing with you the turning points of my research and my ultimate conclusions about the Abele Magaziner bond. One of the first sources I consulted, thanks to Bruce Laverty at the Athenaeum and my cousin Fred Magaziner, Lewis's grandson, was an unpublished manuscript written by Henry Magaziner, Fred's dad and Lewis's son. Henry, as many of you know, followed in his father's footsteps by going to Penn for architecture. Henry joined his father's practice and later became a well-known architectural historian and the architect for Independence National Park. Henry was very fond of Julian Abele and hoped to write a historical novel for young adults based on Abele's life. A passage from the never-published would-be book, quote, "During Lou's last 2 years and Julian's first 2 at Penn, the Jew and the African American joined forces. Both did beautiful work. They became buddies, ate lunch together, attended football games together, and developed a friendship which was to last throughout their lives." Another passage from Henry's manuscript, describing a scene from a few decades later, quote, "One Saturday, Julian and his friend Lou were having their usual weekly lunch together. Lou said, 'The other day I was in your Union League edition. It's really very handsome.' Julian replied, 'Thanks, but you won't believe it. I couldn't even go through the front door. Because I'm black, I had to use the servants' entrance.' 'Well, I'm white,' said Lou, 'so I did go in through the front door. However, I'm Jewish, so I can't join the club. But making you use the servants' entrance, and you were the architect, that's unforgivable.' Naturally, I ate up this fictional conversation, longing for it to be true. Indeed, thanks to Henry, my civil rights narrative remained intact. Here's the thing about Henry, though. Much to my cousin slash my grandfather, his cousin slash my grandfather's dismay, Henry was a very liberal Democrat. And even worse, he was married to a teacher at a Quaker school. Henry was just as susceptible as I am to long for the oppressed outsider narrative. Quick footnote, Reba Magaziner, Henry's wife, was my husband Michael's 6th grade teacher for his first year at Germantown, France. One more quick footnote. A photo I found on Tracy Rich's Magaziner website. A 1916 trip to the beach for the children of those first Magaziners to come to America. At that point, my grandfather at the top of the photo and Henry were separated more by age than by politics. And yes, I did choose the colors of those arrows intentionally. But back to my quest to understand the Abele-Magaziner friendship. My next research trip was to the Fine Arts Library at Penn. During the time Abele and Magaziner were students, the School of Architecture followed the École des Beaux-Arts system of instruction. In a 1926 description of the program written by a professor at Penn School of Architecture, I found the following shocking paragraph. In an atelier, one of the causes for the rapid development of the new student is the tradition already mentioned as one of the features of the école system, the older, more advanced pupils helping the younger, and what goes with it, the younger men working for the older. This latter is called niggering and consists of doing anything the advanced man asks. We know that Abele and Magaziner were indeed formally paired in this way, and most likely this pairing was based on their outsider status. And we can make some assumptions about the WASP supremacist atmosphere in which they prepared for their chosen profession. But as I spent time looking through old yearbooks, my oppression narrative was challenged. Louis Magaziner was given the honor of designing and even signing the yearbook cover for Penn's class of 1900. Abele, moreover, was a winner, a leader, the star student of the class of 1902. The Beaux-Arts system involves numerous competitions, and Abele garnered more first-place awards than any student in his class. These drawings of a botanical museum and a post office are just two of his many award-winning designs. He was even the president of the Architectural Society. This image, with Abele sitting almost king-like among his peers, pretty much sums it up. I needed to dig deeper. There had to be more to their bond than a shared rejection by their peers. I had to let go of my notion of Abele and Magaziner as outcasts, linked by a shared sense of indignation at their outsider status. Another Athenaeum resource, a binder of transcribed interviews done by historian Drek Wilson in the late 1980s. Wilson spoke to Lewis's son Henry Magaziner and also to Abele's descendants and others who had direct memories of Abele. A consistent picture of Abele emerged. He was described as cultured, quiet, fastidious, and dapper. His hobbies included needlepoint, yay needlepoint, woodworking, painting, and playing the piano. He attended operas and symphonies. He wore a suit even when vacationing in Wildwood. The closest he ever came to using profanity were the words confounded and darn. Try to envision his home at 1515 Christian Street as described by his great-nephew, John Cook. Quote, "The living room was 18th century French. He would do his own needlework for the sofa. The dining room was very elegant. He had one Fragonard painting that was huge." And this is a sample of a Fragonard painting that I found online. And on the other side, he had another Fragonard painting. He had the dining room table in the center of the room. Everything was right, even the fancy sterling silver. We had to dress for dinner. Unquote. This is a lamp that that Julian Abele made for Louis Magaziner and his wife Selma for their wedding. And this is a detail from the base of the lamp. And here is a hand-painted tray that he made as a wedding gift for another dear friend. In reading these interviews, it is also clear that Abele was far from a racial firebrand. His wife, Marguerite, was white. His servants were black. He was light-skinned and could pass. To quote Drek Wilson, his biographer, "For all intents and purposes, Julian did not consider himself black. He was almost aracial. He buried himself in being an artist." So a new potential narrative emerged. My mom's most vivid memories of her Uncle Lou are that he always took out his drawing materials when she would visit his Powelton Village home, and that after a leak ruined a patch of ornate wallpaper, Uncle Lou painted in the damaged area with his own hand. My new theory: Lou and Julian were both refined, artistic souls. As such, they must have respected each other's sophistication and taste. As Abele de-emphasized his blackness and spent most of his free time perfecting his home and engaging in artistic pursuits, I surmise that Magaziner similarly was too ethereal to be deeply engaged in the Jewish community. I found some evidence to support my new theory during a visit to the University of Pennsylvania archives. A note to Lou from Warren Laird, then the dean of the architecture school, indicating that he had enclosed a letter of introduction for Abele and Magaziner to use during their upcoming trip to Europe, and a thank you letter from Abele in which he indicated that the trip might have to be delayed. Although the trip never took place, it made sense to me that these two sensitive lovers of high art would want to tour the continent together. And note that at that point in 1908, they both worked at the Land Title Building. I also found the 1900 School of Architecture yearbook and Magaziner's interesting senior projects: an Episcopal church and a baptismal font. Aha, the smoking guns. Magaziner, like Abele, did not identify with his own people. My next trip to the Athenaeum, however, quickly contradicted my theory. Magaziner was a meticulous record keeper. Going through his files, it was clear that not only were many of his clients Jewish, like Peter Shapiro, for whom he designed a series of movie houses, including the Uptown Theater, but so were his contractors. Jewish electricians, Jewish plasterers, Jewish engineers. Magaziner was the architect for the Hillel at Penn State, a Hebrew orphan home, the Jewish Farm School, now Delaware Valley University, and several other Jewish projects. Magaziner's partners, Victor Eberhardt and James Russell Harris, whoops, I don't want that one yet. Magaziner's partners, Victor Eberhardt and James Russell Harris, were both members of the WASP establishment. I think we can assume that Magaziner was choosing Jewish contractors by choice rather than necessity. This letter, from very late in Louis Magaziner's career, is part of a series of exchanges about a proposed move of Mikveh Israel Synagogue to Independence Mall. Henry Magaziner, at that point working closely with his dad, lists the several synagogue projects on which they were currently working. By the way, Mikveh Israel decided not to move forward at that time. They considered the move again a few years later and hired another Beaux-Arts trained Jewish graduate of Penn School of Architecture, Louis Kahn. That project never came to fruition, though someone wrote an entire book about Kahn's non-building. After reading the series of Abele interviews, Julian had become vivid to me. Although Magaziner was my relative, he was still an abstraction several months into my research. I was frustrated and felt like I had hit a dead end. I noticed that his obituary mentioned a few different organizations with which he was affiliated. As it turns out, the best way to get to know my great-grand-uncle was to go to Temple. Not this Temple, the Jewish archives at Temple University. It was there that I got to hear Lou's voice as I explored his central role in a variety of Jewish organizations. If you read my Hidden City piece, you know that Magaziner was a longtime member of the Pow Wow Club, a literary club launched in the 1890s by members of Philadelphia's Jewish elite. According to Henry Magaziner, Lou sought inclusion in this group, something that was unusual for an immigrant lacking the status and deep roots of his German Jewish co-religionists. In looking through the Pow Wow records, I learned a few things about Uncle Lou. 1, he was funny. 2, he, unlike Abele, knew how to be one of the guys. He could be quite the bro, to use the current term. 3, he, again to use the current term, got shit done. Lou spent decades as the secretary of the organization. He arranged all of the meeting times, informed club members about scheduling and rescheduling, and then rescheduling again their get-togethers. To give you a bit of the flavor of the Pow Wow Club, an invitation to a gathering showing Lou's humor and artistic skills. So it says Chief Irvin Stone, which is a play on words because the president's name of the club was Irving Stone, calls for a powwow of all his delight makers, medicine men, warriors, sachems, and vice versas. And then at the bottom, a chorus of bob-haired squaws. I know it's not politically correct. This was 1924. And I'm almost certain that he drew and watercolored in the image there, because if you look under the first W, here's a detail. He seems to have put his initials. A 1924 letter to Lou from then club president Irving Stone. Dear Lou, it has been suggested by Elkin and Leon that we hold powwow in the new wide building at Broad and Pine. What is your opinion? Very truly yours. I include this letter for two reasons. One, it is typical of how the club worked. The titular leader or another member would have an idea, but it was always left to Lou to make the idea a reality. Two, the letter mentions the Y at Broad and Pine, the place where I met my husband of 25 years, many, many years ago when we went to nursery school together in that building. A similar 1929 letter. Dear Lou, is the powwow completely dead? If so, kindly order a crepe and have it sent to the deceased members. If there is still some life, get out your stylus and restore the powwow to its former health and vigor. Yours truly. And finally, a 1946 letter to Lou from then President Jack Salas Cohen. Dear Lou, a number of the members of the powwow were having dinner together the other night and suggested that now that the war is over, we ought to have another meeting. Dr. Rosenbach, yes, that Dr. Rosenbach, was with us, and we suggested to him to take it and have the boys at Delancey Street. I think if you will call him, it can be arranged. If he doesn't want to take it, perhaps Leon Obermeyer will, or I will be glad to. May I suggest that as a speaker we invite Elkin Henley Jr. to tell of his experiences at the various conferences he attended with Roosevelt? In addition, it might also be possible to get Bobby Wolf, it's too much glare, who has just returned to Philadelphia after participating in the Nuremberg trials, very sincerely. This letter exemplifies the esprit of the club. The boys at this point were men in their 60s and 70s. Secondly, you can tell by the high-level positions they had during and after World War II from which strata of society these men came. To my surprise, Uncle Lou was also a Mason. He was a member of the Hackenberg Lodge. In contrast to the esteemed members of the powwow, the Hackenberg Masons were from a less elevated segment of Jewish society. An automotive parts distributor, a tire salesman, a purveyor of smoked fish, a hardware merchant, a scrap metal dealer, a waste material trader, a patrolman, and a wholesale hosiery jobber, whatever that is. These were Lou Magaziner's cohorts in the lodge. I chose this particular list of new members because it includes Milton Kahn, the dermatologist who got me through those problematic teen years. Lou served as treasurer for the lodge, an organization that included many men who served during the Second World War, including Dr. Kahn. But the organization in which he seems to have been most active was the board of directors for the Hebrew Sheltering Home and Day Nursery. Located on the corner of Schoolhouse Lane and Wissahickon Avenue in Germantown, this social service organization served the needs of Jewish orphans and unwed mothers. Lou's involvement began in the early 1920s. Not surprisingly, he became chairman of the House and Grounds Committee, a position that made use of his experience with buildings, and particularly this building, which his firm had designed. He was deeply involved in making decisions about new construction, shoring up problematic structures, and maintaining a safe and attractive space for its needy inhabitants. Sewage problems, roof leaks, broken appliances, all fell under his area of responsibility. Touchingly, he also became the head of the Welfare Committee, the group charged with making sure that the children and young women at the home received the services and programming they needed, a description of one of the charges of the Hebrew sheltering home. Augusta, 19 years old, Jewish, referred by misdemeanants court. Augusta was supervised by the Personal Service Bureau during 1921, but without success. When arrested and brought into court, Augusta claimed that her mother always talked about her to the neighbors and called her names. Since she is under our care, we have had a great deal of trouble with her. She is very impudent and lazy. The man responsible for her condition is married and has 2 children. Magaziner attended weekly Sunday meetings throughout the 1920s and 1930s and into the early 1940s. The other leaders included members of his and thus my family. My great-grandfather Louis Herbeck was a sometimes participant, and his brother Joseph Herbeck was the longtime president of the board. Interestingly, Magaziner is sometimes referred to as the founder of the Homewood School. The Homewood School was simply the successor name to the Hebrew sheltering home, a name change that Lou did indeed propose in one of the many well-documented and probably tedious board meetings he attended. So clearly, when Julian Abele was home playing piano and doing needlework, surrounded by images of 18th century French aristocrats, Lou Magaziner was engaging in witty repartee with the elite Jewish boys, cementing his Americanness with the striving Jewish Masons, or getting into the weeds of running a large Jewish social service organization with members of his own extended family. And yet, they continued to meet for their Saturday lunches. During football season, they would go to games at Franklin Field or even on the road. Surely one of the only, if not the only, interracial pair of friends in attendance. Out of football season, their post-lunch routine was to visit one or the other's offices to offer critiques and encouragements, both finding that the input of their friend made their own work stronger. And it was to Lou whom Julian turned for consolation when his wife Marguerite left him for one of her singing students. Clearly, they were not the civil rights activists I first pictured. Nor were they both the sensitive, artistic souls more dedicated to aesthetics than the welfare of their own people. So here is what I think they shared. First of all, and I'm sure many of you can relate to this, they got to know each other during a period of youthful excitement and idealism. Don't many of us retain affection for our high school or college friends long after our interests, priorities, or sensibilities have drifted apart? Secondly, they were both excellent architects. Abele designed more high prestige buildings, and Magaziner was able to demonstrate his skills in a wider variety of styles, but they both remained enamored of and respected in their chosen profession. Third, they both displayed a particular type of pride. Both Abele and Magaziner were well-established architects who succeeded very soon after graduating from the University of Pennsylvania. But neither of them applied to the AIA, the American Institute of Architects, until they were nearing the end of their careers. Neither Julian nor Lou wanted to openly challenge nor risk rejection from this, at the time, notoriously racist and anti-Semitic organization. They both applied and were admitted in the 1940s, long after their respective bodies of work should have ensured their acceptance. In Lou's case, we know from Henry Magaziner that he didn't even apply until he was personally invited to do so. Abele, with endorsements from the likes of Fisk Kimball, longtime president of the Philadelphia Museum of Art, became the first Black member of the Philadelphia chapter and the second Black architect ever admitted. And finally, Yes, I guess the final key must have been football. Apparently, they never missed a home game. Go Quakers. And just for today, go Eagles.